was in full form. And he observed the classrooms, and he observed what was going on, and he liked it. And he said, this is very, very good, because we're teaching our children not to be individuals or individualistic, but to support a common interest, to support the communal. And Stalin was doing a fantastic job of this. He comes back to the United States, he brags about it, he writes a piece in the New Republic. And interestingly enough, Pete, one of the people well, several of the people who liked what John Dewey was writing were all these school administrators. And so he wrote prolifically. John Dewey's impact affects our schools today. It actually affects journalism today. And he rejected the Declaration of Independence. He rejected the Constitution, all the early so-called progressives.
The founder of America's public school system.
That's right.
Rejects the Declaration of Independence.
The founder of its destruction. Yeah, they all do.
Its destruction.
And I'll tell you why. Because the Declaration of Independence makes abundantly clear that this nation was founded on a belief of God and faith. You cannot be a Marxist or Marxist-like progressive and believe in faith in God, because your faith is in government. Your faith is in man, and only certain men, only yourself, and people who agree with you. That's one of the reasons why the First Amendment's under attack and free speech is under attack. Marxists don't want debate. They don't want ideas. They're self-righteous. They're self-aggrandizing. They wish to impose their attitude on people. It's the same with education. We talk about academic freedom. There is no academic freedom. It's more indoctrination today than ever before. And people, oddly, thanks to the virus, who were watching the classrooms on their monitors, sitting next to their kid or looking over their shoulder, suddenly became familiar with critical race theory because they saw what their kids were being taught. It was like, oh my God, what is going on in this classroom here? Or transgenderism has become a movement. You're teaching my 8-year-old about transgenderism. You're teaching my 8-year-old if they're black that they have no hope because they're black and racism. You're teaching a white kid that they have no hope because of all that's occurred in the past and it's their fault and so forth. This is the sort of thing John Dewey would be very proud of. The early progressives are proud of. And let me ask you this. Do you know of a single prominent Democrat who's criticized this? Joe Biden has signed executive orders supporting critical race theory. Why? Why? Because they're the American form of Marxists. They're not progressives, quote unquote. They're not democratic socialists. They're not all these ambiguous terms that they assign to themselves. They conduct themselves the same way. They're not as aggressive, they're not as complete. I didn't call the book Marxism. I called it American.
Other institutions are used to wield that power, whether it's our media, whether it's social media, universities, but nonetheless, opponents will be silenced or marginalized.
Well, because if you look at the Democrat Party today, you look at the media today, you look at academia today, they're not promoting freedom. They're promoting the opposite. They're not promoting debate. They're crushing debate. They don't believe in the constitutional system where you win some and you lose some and you play by the rules. They want to destroy the constitutional system. And if you read what these people write, and if you read what these people say, it's no surprise. My view is I'm trying to make the American people aware everybody can't read Marcuse and Marx and Derek Bell and all these people. Unfortunately, I've had to read them and hundreds of others.
How many citations in this book, by the way, Mark?
Over 400. This book could have been 800 pages long with 1,000. I said, who the hell's going to read that? I won't even read it. So,
well, as you mentioned things, it brings to mind other aspects of the book that you unwind. Actually, the idea of who silences people, that's chapter 2, repressive mobs. You create mobs and the outrage that's there amongst the acceptable thinking of the age, and then you enforce it. But you go back to all these professors. It's always a new professor with a new theory, and there's a number of them. You just rattled a few of them off. And they sort of throw, whether it's critical theory, the precursor to critical race theory, that's a theory. It's never has to be proven that it works, but it's a new progressive theory to perfect ourselves. Are they ever held to account for whether or not their theories are effective?
No. Look at the war on the cops. We heard about defunding the police, then slashing their budgets. We saw it with our own two eyes. We saw what these Democrats did in these cities. We saw that Joe Biden sat there on his hands.
Mm-hmm.
We saw Kamala Harris supporting it openly. We see the Democrat Party and the Marxist wing of the Democrat Party, which is becoming the Democrat Party. They promoted this sort of thing. It actually happened. And now they're blaming Republicans for not voting for trillions of dollars in government spending and reorganizing our society and our economy because some of that money could have been used to help cops. Let me remind people of something. The issue with the cops wasn't whether or not there was enough money. They slashed the budgets.
Mm-hmm.
In New York, they took over $1 billion away from the cops. So it wasn't if the Republicans don't vote at the federal level to give us money, they won't have enough money for the cops. They took the budgets they had for the cops and they slashed them. So you see the consequences of this American Marxist movement. BLM pushed this, AOC pushed this, the Democrat Party embraced it. We have dead people, they have blood on their hands, and what do? They blame somebody else. We need to confront this. We need to know exactly what we're confronting. We need to use the proper words. We need to start unraveling this piece by piece, and that's the point of the book. This book isn't just a book about me. There's nothing about me in this book. This book isn't a book about theory. There's theory in here to break it down. This book is about, hey folks, let me tell you what's going on. A little deeper than the surface level. We see things, we talk about things, then we kind of walk away from it. If we walk away from this, we're walking away from our country, our children, and our grandchildren. This is a call for action. This is a cause for alarm. And I don't know how else to do it other than radio, TV, and this book. We'll be right back.
Pressure is building on the White House to help those left behind after American troops withdrew from Afghanistan. Meantime, domestic flights have resumed in that country. The state-owned Ariana Afghan Airlines is operating between Kabul and 3 provinces. Another migrant caravan, presumably headed to the U.S., has been intercepted in southern Mexico. Some 800 people, including women and children, were traveling in this one. Dozens are in custody. Many others escaped into the nearby hills. I'm John Scott. Now, back to Life, Liberty, and Levin.
Welcome back, folks. Thanks for being with us. I consider this a very, very important program, not because it's about my book, but it's about American Marxism. We need to spread the word. Each and every one of you need to be the Paul Reveres out there. That's our strength. We have strength in numbers, in communities, in neighborhoods, in church groups, in temple groups, baseball fields, and so forth. That's who we are. Red-blooded Yanks, Americans. That's our strength. And speaking of red-blooded Americans, Pete Hegseth, thank you, sir.
That's why I love coming to the bunker, Mark. You're a true believer. From the moment we got in here, we've been talking about this stuff, and so much we can't get into all of it. We're going to get to journalism in a moment, because that section fascinated me. But first, critical race theory. It's everywhere. We hear about CRT. You dissect where it comes from, even critical theory. Why did the left feel like it needed to use race in America to pursue their goals?
Because the Marxists has decided to use whatever they possibly can in America, a free country, and so they look for things to exploit. And so race is beautiful to exploit in this country, given our history, given the battles we have from the Civil War all the way up. And so they developed this theory. Stanford Law School, Harvard Law School, a guy by the name of Derek Bell. Mm-hmm. And he stole it or modified it from a Marxist by the name of Marcuse, who came out of Berlin, the so-called Franklin School, and they developed critical theory, which started in our law schools. And that critical theory basically says all law is written by the dominant culture. So victims, those who are oppressed, minorities, they can't get a fair break, because the dominant culture writes the law, and so the law is unjust.
So critical theory says everything that exists needs to be torn down, because it's
Marxist. That's exactly right. And so Bell took this Harvard Law, let's apply this to race. And so everything in this society has to be seen through the lens of race. And when you look through the lens of race, he says, what you see is white supremacy, a white dominant society from the very, very beginning. So our economic system, our legal system, our culture is built on this white dominant, white supremacy model. And so either you reject it or you acknowledge it, but it has to be destroyed. So these are what I call these American Marxist movements that have been spawned from Marxism. Marcuse could not understand how it is that Hitler was able to rise and the communists were not after the Weimar Republic fell. And he was a communist. Mm-hmm. So he flees Berlin, comes to the United States, and spews his Marxism, wrote many books. He was a tenured professor in at least 3 Ivy League colleges where he pushed this agenda. He trashed America every step of the way, and his writings, particularly one of his books, caught the eye of people who we now call the New Left, from the New Left movement. Students for Democrat Action, the Weather Underground. He's considered the founding father of the New Left movement, but he's also the founding father of critical theory, which is the basis of critical race theory. So when Joy Reid goes on TV and brings in Kendi or these others, Kendi and the others didn't invent these ideologies. They're making millions and millions of dollars off of promoting this ideology and pretending that they don't know what the history is. I know what the history is. It's like Patton in North Africa when he defeated Rommel, and he said, "Rommel, I read your book." Well, I read Marcuse's books. I read what Beau wrote. And you know, the great Thomas Sowell was on to Beau. He had no respect for him. He thought he was an intellectual lightweight. Bell's ideology was considered fringe at the time, not to be taken seriously. Now it's being taught to our elementary school students and others. It is an anti-American, anti-capitalism, pro-Marxist ideology. And if anybody doesn't believe it, read it, because they tell us this. Now they're trying to play games with their propagandists in the media at MSNBC and CNN. This is what the Republicans are doing. They don't want to teach slavery. Who doesn't want to teach slavery? They don't understand. We Republicans eliminated slavery. Yes. It was the Democrats who promoted slavery.
But these names like Marcuse and like Beau, most people, myself included with Beau, never heard of them. And you talk about in the book how they're happy with that view. They're happy to be in the backgrounds. And then they enter the classrooms. And then, do they just have an understanding that through, in the Army we'd call it a train-the-trainer approach, but you're training the next generation, and they go further with it, you recede into the background, and then they take it to the fore. So is their plan always been to go from the university level down and use our openness and tolerance as a society against us?
For some of them. The faculty in these universities are incestuous. They are responsible for hiring each other. In a book I wrote, Plundering the Seat, I went back and I looked at the faculty are involved with hiring people who they know from the same university, so it's very incestuous. Mm-hmm. You get this propaganda, you get this indoctrination. That's why we really don't have academic freedom. So some of them are that way. But there's also a woman who I quote there who is iconic in the Marxist or neo-Marxist movement, as they call it. And she wrote a lot about how we teach Marxism in our colleges, and Americanizing, how we do this. And so, you see, here,
some of them are out in the open. You provide those
Some
examples.
of them are in the open, some of them are not. But here's the deal. Every human being is imperfect. Every society is imperfect. What Marxism does is it creates the fantasy of a perfect world where everybody's equal. After the Russian Revolution, Lenin famously said, okay, Marx tells us how to take over. He doesn't tell us how to rule. How are we going to get this workers' paradise? And so in order to get the workers' paradise, you have to kill people. You need to destroy people. You need to destroy their careers. You cannot have free speech. You cannot have competition. You cannot have open debate. If you're going to compel people to live in a society, all kinds of individuality, independent thinking, all that kind of stuff has to go. We see it playing out today in Cuba. Mm-hmm. These are police states. It is a fancy ideology and a fancy name for tyrants and totalitarians. These are police states. And that is exactly what's being proposed in this country. The Biden administration is going door to door trying to force people to get vaccines. We've never done this in this country. The Biden administration wants big tech to monitor texts to see if people are putting out information with which the administration disagrees. The Biden administration is working with a compliant Facebook and big tech to do what? To silence anybody who doesn't agree with government policy. It is happening now in front of us. Now, we can talk about it, we can bang the pots and pans, but one of the reasons I wrote this book is that's not enough. That's key. We need to know exactly what's going on. We have to put away the facade that this is just liberalism or leftism or social activism. Call it what it is. Make sure our fellow citizens at least have an opportunity to know what it is, and then do something about it. This is where we fail. We don't do anything about it, which is why I put the last chapter in the book. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. The topic with my friend Pete Hegseth is how do we save the country from American Marxism, and what is American Marxism, and what do we do about it? You're on.
I'm on journalism. You hit it head on here. You talk about two phrases that I was not all that familiar with before: public journalism and pseudo events. They tell us a lot.
I'll give you an example of pseudo events right now. There are 3 books right now that are hate Trump books that are filled with gossip and quotes. General Milley said this and General Milley said that. These are pseudo events. That is, why are news departments talking about 3 books that are trashing a former president of the United States? And unfortunately, we all fall into this because there's juicy stuff in there. We want to talk about it. We want to get our hits. We want to get our ratings. What are we going to do about it? Nothing. And this is part of the problem, the media in this country. What are the media in this country? We do not have an objective press in this country, and there's reason for this, and I have a whole section in the book. And I wrote an entire book on this, but this is not that. It's called public journalism. And what is public journalism? It sounds so sweet, like progressivism.
Great, yeah.
It's the same thing as progressivism. It's the same thing as this American Marxism. There was a time ago where journalists sought to be objective. Journalists sought to provide the news. You can't be perfectly objective. I mean, there's some subjective view that goes into picking what the news is. But that's different. At least you're trying to do the right thing. They've given that up. If you watch Chuck Todd on the Sunday shows, or George Stephenson, or you look who they hire as news people, mostly Democrats, but definitely leftists. It's abundantly clear. The last 5 years, Donald Trump exposed it completely. They exposed themselves completely. They're still doing it completely. The way they cover up for Biden, the way they push the Marxist or Democrat Party radical agenda. They never talk about what it is exactly that the Democrats are proposing when it comes to the vote. That is, destroying the voting franchise is what they're proposing. So there's an entire ideology that's been at work for decades. It still is. It's called public journalism. And what it means is we journalists are citizens too. And we can't just report on what's going on. We have to provide a context for it. Remember Dewey about the schools?
Yep.
You can't just teach math and science. There's got to be a social agenda. They love Dewey. They talk about Dewey. He has an enormous influence in journalism schools today, as he does in education schools today. And the point is, it's an excuse for advancing the radical agenda, which is why, almost to a man and woman, they tried to destroy Donald Trump. They badmouth his supporters. They tried to destroy Ronald Reagan and badmouth his supporters. They're silent, if not celebratory, with the Democrat control of the House and the Senate. They promote AOC, who's really a nobody, who knows nothing. They promote her as the face of a movement.
She's a perfect pseudo-congresswoman.
A pseudo-congresswoman, really. She's really irrelevant. But and so you will not find, as I've said before, a penny's worth of difference between the mass media today and these various positions and policies of these spawned Marxist movements in America.
Is that because they teach public journalism at journalism schools? So when you come out, you're trained to say, we've got to create the context. And
that is a big part of it. But the newspaper business, the media business, has obviously embraced all of this.
Yeah.
These corporatists have embraced all this, as they have in their own boardrooms. So this is what they want to promote. There are no conservative hosts on CNN or MSNBC. There are no objective hosts. They are all of the radical bent. So the point is, they're pushing an agenda. They're taught to push an agenda. They come out of the Democrat Party, for the most part, pushing an agenda. And that's one of the reasons the country's in such horrific shape.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back. And welcome, Pete Hedges.
Thank you. As we talked about in the break, we could talk about this all day. There's so much in here. Mark, I want to go back to the solutions, though, because we mentioned they're in there. A couple of examples. People watching, what can they do?
10,000 words on solutions. Now, I'm not the expert on solutions, but they're Mark's ideas. I've been an activist 40 years. I've served on a school board. There are a lot of people out there who are already doing a lot of things, but my goal is to galvanize us, to rally us, to network us, so we have a national movement, as we did with the Tea Party movement, or the Reagan Revolution, or the Trump Revolution, or however you want to talk about it. The colonists early on, this is how they communicated with each other. They communicated in the written word. Thomas Paine in his long pamphlets, 47 pages long, The American Crisis, and it spread from dinner table to dinner table, from pub to pub, school to school, and that's exactly what I'm hoping will be done here. As an example, and obviously I can't run through all of them, let's take a look at our public schools. We own these schools. They're called public schools. They're government schools. We pay the salaries. We pay the medical care and the pensions. We pay the dues, ultimately, for the unions. We pay for the classrooms. We pay for the building. We pay for the administrators. And we have no say whatsoever. We're not even sure what's going on in these classrooms. And they won't tell us. We have a teachers union that is clearly part of the American Marxist movement.
Absolutely.
They've announced that regardless of what parents think, they are pushing critical race theory. They are pushing the transitioning model. They're pushing whatever the hell they want to. So I have argued, thanks to a caller into my radio program, that one of the things we need to do is have cameras in the classroom. Cameras in the classroom. We had cameras in the classroom all through the virus. That's how people saw what was going on and were shocked. If cops wear cameras, we have cameras on cop cars. If many courtrooms in the country have cameras, then why should we have them in the classroom?
We pay for them.
We pay for
our
them.
Kids.
We own it. Then the unions will fight it, but the hell with the unions. What else should we do? Do we know what's in the teachers' contracts? No. Well, why don't we? We need to FOIA that information. Do we know how teachers are hired? No. Well, why don't we? Do we know how teachers get promotions? No. Why don't we? Do we know how textbooks are chosen and put in our classroom? How seminars take place? What kind of training our teachers get? I'm saying it's time for us to put them on their heels, use the Freedom of Information Act, use these legal groups across the country or a local litigator. Let's get in there. Let's find out what's going on. Let's push back against the union. And what about these unions, the NAA and the AFT? When I was president of the Landmark Legal Foundation, we filed complaints, IRS complaints, against the NEA, because the NEA is nothing but a political institution and an appendage of the Democrat Party that's pushing all these American Marxist movements. So let's challenge them. Let's challenge their tax status. They're not doing what they say they do. We can take quotes from Randy Weingarten, who heads the AFT. We can go on the website of the National Education Association, use their words, and make these filings. You can do this from your desk. I'm saying everybody...
We show people how to do it.
And I give the links. I explain how to do it. I just don't say go do it. And that's the goal. That's the last chapter, the action chapter, as my wife Judy calls it, the pushback chapter.
Absolutely. You just mentioned education. But you talk about corporations, climate, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, rioters, law enforcement. So if education's not your thing, there's going to be an arena in which you can get involved.
There's a lot we can do with corporations. We don't have enough time to talk about it, but you know they do have shareholder meetings. We don't go to them. The other side does. And there's other things we can do about corporations. What about sporting leagues? There's things we can do. Of course. We still have the ability to exercise our freedom, to speak to each other, to network. There's so many things we can do, and I'm hoping we will do many of them, and that's in the last chapter. We'll be right back.
Absolutely. And I've got one final question for you, Mark. Before I do, I would be remiss if I didn't look into the camera and say, this is a book everybody needs to get. I've read your other books. You never mince words. But to be the leader and on the forefront as you are, to say we have to call it by its name, and only by calling its name are we able to then truly identify it and truly do something about it. Otherwise we're playing patty cake, And that's what we've been doing so long. Well-intentioned on a lot of levels, even the way I've argued things in the past. So to see a book that says, this is what it is, this is what you need to know about it, here's who's responsible about it, and then you can do what you can do about it is incredibly refreshing. Because the hammer and sickle with the flag on it in the back is scary, but it is here. And we have to do something about it. So Mark, with the book out, and with the wonderful reception it's gotten, what are you hoping for?
First of all, thank you,
Of course.
for what you've done in the past for the country and what you're doing now. You're a great voice for liberty. I'll put it succinctly. There's hundreds of thousands, there's millions of us who are concerned about where this country's going. There are hundreds of thousands of you already who've bought the book. We need to spread the word. We need to explain what's going on beyond the surface level, beyond sound bites. We can do this. We are smart. We are the American people. Whether you're an electrician or a plumber or a trucker, whether you build homes, whether you're a painter, whether you're a lawyer or a doctor or everything in between, we are red-blooded Americans. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or an independent. I don't care if you're a libertarian or a moderate. None of it matters. If you love America and you want to save America and you care about your kids and future generations, we must galvanize and rally. I don't know how else to say it. If you love your country, then stand for your country. Thank you, Pete.
Mark, thank you.
We'll see you next time on Life, Liberty, and Liberty.